I never thought moving into a suburban neighborhood would feel like stepping into a battleground, but that's exactly what happened when I bought my dream house in Oakwood Estates. My name is Ryan, and I'm just an ordinary guy who worked hard for everything I have. After years of saving, working extra shifts, and sacrificing vacations, I was finally able to afford a beautiful 2-story house with a wide porch, a manicured lawn, and a backyard big enough for barbecues with friends. It was supposed to be the beginning of a quiet, peaceful life. I imagined evenings on the porch swing, mornings sipping coffee while watching the sunrise, and weekends tending to my garden. But all of that calm, all of those peaceful visions, were shattered the moment I received my very first letter from the Homeowners Association, better known as the HOA. At first, I thought it was just a welcome packet or a simple introduction. After all, the neighborhood had seemed friendly when I toured it. Families waved at me, kids rode bikes along the sidewalks, and the houses were lined up in perfect little rows like something out of a magazine. But when I opened the envelope, instead of a warm welcome, I was met with a demand, a $500 fine for having my trash bins visible from the street on a non-pickup day. I stood in my kitchen holding the paper, blinking in disbelief. I had moved in just 3 days earlier, and the bins hadn't even been mine, the previous owners had left them out. I thought it was a mistake, so I called the number on the letter and explained the situation. That was my first conversation with Karen, the HOA president. Her clipped, irritated tone made it clear she wasn't interested in my explanation. "Rules are rules," she said. "You're responsible for what happens on your property, whether you just moved in or not." Then she hung up. That was my first taste of what life under the HOA would be like. Over the next few weeks, the letters kept coming, each one demanding money for some new violation. They fined me for leaving my truck parked in my own driveway instead of in the garage. They fined me for having a flower bed that didn't match the approved neighborhood color palette. They even fined me for having a welcome mat with a funny message on it. Apparently, "Wipe your paws" was considered inappropriate. Every fine came with a threat: pay immediately or face escalating fees and legal action. It was exhausting, frustrating, and it made me feel like I was living in a prison run by my neighbors. I tried to be reasonable at first. I attended an HOA meeting to talk things through, thinking I could clear the air and find some middle ground. But the meeting was a nightmare. Karen sat at the head of the table like a queen holding court, with her little clique of board members nodding along to everything she said. When I brought up the fines and tried to explain that they were unfair, she smirked and said, "If you don't like it here, maybe you should move somewhere else." The other board members laughed. My face burned with anger, but I bit my tongue and walked out. That was the moment I knew this was war. I started keeping records of every single letter, every call, every absurd violation notice they sent me. I took photos, printed emails, and even recorded some of my conversations with Karen. The more I looked into it, the more I realized the HOA wasn't just strict, they were corrupt. Their budget was a mess, with thousands of dollars disappearing every year under vague administrative expenses. Karen was using HOA funds to pay for landscaping at her own house, and she'd hired her brother's company for maintenance contracts that didn't even exist. The more I uncovered, the angrier I got. This wasn't just about me anymore. They were bullying everyone in the neighborhood, draining people's money, and getting away with it. Then came the final straw, a letter demanding $50,000 in cumulative fines. According to them, I had violated so many rules that I owed them what amounted to a year's salary, or else they would put a lien on my house and start foreclosure proceedings. That letter lit a fire in me. I wasn't just going to fight them anymore. I was going to destroy them. After I read that $50,000 fine letter, I didn't sleep for 2 nights straight. I stayed up at my kitchen table with a pot of black coffee, the letter sitting in front of me like a declaration of war. I kept running through my options. I could pay them, but that would mean draining my savings and giving in to their power trip. I could sell the house, but that would mean letting them win and losing the home I'd worked so hard for. Or I could fight, really fight. And if I fought, I needed to make sure that when I struck back, would hit so hard they wouldn't get back up. I opened my laptop and began researching how HOAs worked. Most people don't know this, but an HOA is basically just a corporation made up of homeowners who vote to elect a board. The board enforces rules, but ultimately, the power lies with the members. If you own enough property in the neighborhood, you have enough voting power to control the entire HOA. The more I read, the more an idea formed in my mind, a crazy, risky, expensive idea, but one that made me grin for the first time in weeks. If they wanted to threaten me with foreclosure, I would turn the tables. I wasn't just going to beat the HOA in court. I was going to buy the entire HOA. The plan started with information. I spent weeks gathering every HOA document I could get my hands on, meeting minutes, financial reports, bylaws, and membership lists. I learned who owned each house, who was behind on dues, who had been fined unfairly like me. And you know what I found? Almost half the neighborhood hated the HOA as much as I did. People were fed up with Karen and her power-hungry board. They were tired of being told what color they could paint their doors and how tall their grass could grow. They were tired of paying outrageous fees for services that never happened. And most of all, they were scared. The HOA had bullied them into silence. I started talking to those neighbors one by one. I went door to door, introducing myself, listening to their stories, sharing what I discovered. I showed them the missing money, the fraudulent contracts, the way Karen and her cronies were lining their pockets. The more I shared, the angrier my neighbors became, and the more they began to trust me. Some of them were so angry that they were ready to help me. A retired accountant down the street offered to go through the HOA's books with me line by line. A lawyer who lived 2 blocks over said she'd represent me pro bono if I decided to take them to court. But I wasn't just thinking about court anymore. I wanted control. I started making offers to buy houses in the neighborhood. Some people laughed at me, but a surprising number were eager to sell. They were sick of the HOA and just wanted out. I drained my savings, took out loans, and even cashed in part of my retirement fund to make it happen. One by one, I bought properties until I owned enough of them to have a majority vote in the HOA. It was expensive, stressful, and it took months, but when I finally got the notice that my ownership percentage gave me controlling interest, I felt like I had just won a war. The next HOA meeting was one for the history books. I showed up in a clean suit, carrying a stack of papers. Karen sat at the head of the table as usual, wearing her smug little smile. She didn't know what was coming. The meeting started like normal, with her rattling off fines and violations, including my own unpaid balance of $50,000. Then I stood up. Actually, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, we won't be discussing my fines today. In fact, we won't be discussing anyone's fines, because as of this morning, I own 51% of the voting power in this HOA. That means I'm now the president of this association. And my first order of business is dissolving every single ridiculous rule you've put in place. You could have heard a pin drop. Karen's face went pale, then red. She tried to argue, tried to say it was illegal, but I had the documents, the lawyer, and the votes. Within minutes, I had the board removed and replaced with neighbors I trusted. The entire room erupted in cheers. For the first time since moving there, I felt like I belonged. But I wasn't finished. Buying the HOA and taking over was just step 1. I called a special meeting the following week to rewrite the bylaws. We eliminated unnecessary fines, cut dues in half, and set up a transparent accounting system so every dollar could be tracked. I made sure no one would ever again be bullied by a power-hungry board like Karen's. And as for Karen? We audited the books and found enough evidence of financial misconduct to sue her personally. She ended up paying back tens of thousands of dollars to the association. By the end of it all, Karen put her house up for sale and left the neighborhood in disgrace. The transformation in the neighborhood was incredible. People started smiling at each other again. Kids played outside without fear of being too loud. Home values actually went up now that buyers weren't scared away by the tyrannical HOA. My little act of revenge didn't just save me from losing my house, it saved the whole neighborhood from years of abuse. Standing on my porch one evening, watching the sunset, I realized something. They had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, I had taken everything from them. And it felt damn good. Taking over the HOA had felt like winning a war, but what I didn't realize was that wars don't end the second the battle is won. The morning after the meeting where I became HOA president, I woke up to find a stack of angry emails in my inbox. Most of them were from Karen's loyalists, the handful of neighbors who had been on the board with her and enjoyed the power trip. They accused me of staging a hostile takeover and threatened to sue me personally. Some even claimed I had broken the law by buying up properties to gain a majority vote. I wasn't worried, though. I had done everything by the book, and I had a lawyer living 2 streets over who had double-checked every step I took. What I didn't expect was how quickly Karen would try to retaliate. That very same afternoon, I saw her standing in front of my house with her phone out, taking photos of my yard like she used to when she was president. This time, though, she didn't have any power, but she wasn't going to give up without a fight. Over the next few weeks, things got tense. Karen started a smear campaign against me, spreading rumors that I had forced elderly neighbors to sell their houses at unfair prices. She claimed I was turning the HOA into a dictatorship and accused me of using HOA funds to enrich myself, the very thing she had been guilty of. Some people believed her at first. I'd see curtains twitch when I walked past certain houses, and there were a few cold stares at the grocery store. It stung, but I kept my focus on what mattered, making the neighborhood better. We started with simple things. We hired a reputable landscaping company to take care of the common areas. We fixed the broken park benches and added new lights along the walking trail. We organized a neighborhood barbecue, something Karen had banned years ago because she said it was too noisy. Dozens of families showed up, laughing and sharing food. For the first time since I had moved in, I felt like I was living in a real community. But Karen wasn't done. A few days after the barbecue, I got a letter in the mail, not from the HOA, but from a law firm. Karen had filed a lawsuit against me personally, claiming that my takeover had caused her emotional distress and financial loss. My lawyer laughed when she read it, but I didn't take it lightly. Lawsuits can drag on for years, and Karen was clearly hoping to drain me financially out of spite. Instead of panicking, I turned the situation into an opportunity. We held an emergency HOA meeting where I laid everything out for the members, every document, every receipt, every check I had written to buy those properties. I showed them how much of my own money I had spent, not for profit, but to save our neighborhood from Karen's reign. I showed them the financial records proving she had embezzled funds. By the time I finished, the room was silent, and then it erupted into applause. People were furious at Karen, not me. In fact, they voted unanimously to use HOA funds to countersue her for damages. The lawsuit she had filed backfired spectacularly. Even with Karen gone, her little group of loyalists kept causing problems. They started a social media page dedicated to complaining about every change we made, from lowering dues to allowing more freedom in landscaping choices. They called me Dictator Ryan and tried to rally support to remove me from the board. But by then, I had gained so much trust from the majority of the neighborhood that their efforts fizzled out. People had seen the difference real leadership could make. The common areas were cleaner. The budget was transparent. Dues were reasonable. Families who had been planning to move were deciding to stay. Home values were climbing. The neighborhood wasn't just surviving anymore, it was thriving. It wasn't all easy, though. Being in charge of the HOA came with its own headaches. Every little problem now landed on my doorstep, literally and figuratively. People complained about barking dogs, overgrown hedges, and parking disputes. I had to find a balance between enforcing necessary rules and giving people the freedom they deserved. Some nights I stayed up late, going over budgets and thinking about ways to make things better. But as exhausting as it was, I wouldn't have traded it for anything. I had turned a place of misery into a place of pride, and I was determined to keep it that way. Looking back, I think what kept me going was the memory of that $50,000 fine letter, the moment that had lit the fire inside me. Every time I felt tired or overwhelmed, I thought about how close I had come to losing everything. That thought pushed me to keep fighting, not just for me, but for everyone in Oakwood Estates. What had started as a personal vendetta had turned into something much bigger, a mission to make sure no one would ever be bullied in their own neighborhood again. A few months after Karen's lawsuit blew up in her face and she finally sold her house, I thought the worst was behind me. For a while, life in Oakwood Estates was actually good, peaceful, even. Families planted new gardens, people waved when they saw each other, and we even started a neighborhood newsletter to share events and updates. But good times don't stay quiet for long, and I soon discovered that taking control of the HOA had painted a target on my back in a way I hadn't expected. One crisp morning in early spring, I found a sleek black SUV parked outside my house. A man in an expensive suit was leaning against it, waiting for me. When I stepped outside, he straightened up and smiled like a shark. "Mr. Ryan?" he asked. "Name's Blake Turner. I represent Turner Development Group. We'd like to make you an offer." At first, I thought he was joking. Developers had been sniffing around our town for years, trying to buy up land to turn into shopping centers and luxury condos, but they'd never come knocking on my door personally. He handed me a thick folder full of documents, an offer to buy out a huge portion of the neighborhood for what he called a redevelopment initiative. The number he offered was tempting, especially for the properties I had bought to gain control of the HOA. Selling them could have given me back all the money I'd spent and then some. But there was a catch: anyone who didn't sell would eventually be forced out through eminent domain once the development went through. In other words, if I agreed, would be signing the death warrant of Oakwood Estates. I told him no, politely at first. But Turner wasn't the kind of man to take no for an answer. Within a week, glossy flyers started showing up in everyone's mailbox, promising modern living and huge payouts if we sold. Some of my neighbors came to me nervous, asking if it was true that we were going to lose our homes. Others were furious, demanding that I call an emergency HOA meeting to address it. When we met, I explained the situation and assured everyone that as long as I had voting control, Oakwood Estates wasn't going anywhere. But Turner didn't stop. He started buying up the few houses I didn't own, the ones whose owners were tired of fighting and just wanted the money. One by one, more houses went dark, their windows boarded up as Turner Development added them to their portfolio. It felt like déjà vu, like I was back at war again, only this time the enemy wasn't a petty HOA president with a clipboard, it was a corporation with millions of dollars and a team of lawyers. I knew I couldn't fight them alone. I started calling every neighbor I trusted, explaining that we needed to stick together or we'd lose everything. We held block parties, community events, and fundraisers to remind people what we were fighting for. We even started a social media campaign to rally support, posting photos of kids playing in the park, families walking dogs, and the annual neighborhood barbecue. The message was simple: Oakwood Estates wasn't for sale. But Turner's pressure campaign escalated. I started getting anonymous letters, threatening to expose me for abusing my power if I didn't sell. My car tires were slashed one night. Another time, someone threw a rock through my front window while I was sitting in the living room. I filed police reports, but whoever was behind it was careful: no fingerprints, no witnesses. The stress started to get to me. I was barely sleeping, and the weight of responsibility felt heavier than ever. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about protecting the entire neighborhood from being swallowed up and turned into another soulless development. I had to get creative. Using the same strategy that had helped me take control of the HOA, I began buying up more property, not to flip for profit, but to block Turner's plans. I partnered with a few neighbors who were willing to invest with me, forming a community trust that would hold the properties in perpetuity. Together, we built a legal firewall around Oakwood Estates. If Turner wanted to redevelop, he would need unanimous consent from the HOA, and I made sure he would never get it. We also reached out to the local media, telling our story to anyone who would listen. Soon, we had reporters knocking on our doors, filming interviews about how a small neighborhood was standing up to a corporate giant. The public pressure worked. Turner Development eventually backed off, claiming they were moving resources to other projects. The SUV stopped showing up. The threatening letters stopped coming. For the first time in months, I could breathe again. But the fight had changed me. I realized that what I had done, buying the HOA, taking over, defending the neighborhood, had made me a leader whether I wanted to be one or not. And leadership came with sacrifices. My personal life had taken a beating. I had barely gone on a date or taken a vacation in over a year. My friends outside the neighborhood said I had become obsessed, that I was letting Oakwood Estates consume me. Maybe they were right, but when I stood in the middle of the park and saw kids laughing, dogs running, and neighbors smiling, I knew it was worth it. I had turned what used to be a nightmare into a place people were proud to call home. Months passed after Turner Development backed off, and for the first time since I'd moved into Oakwood Estates, there was real peace. No fines. No lawsuits. No threats. No shady developers lurking in SUVs outside my house. It felt strange at first, like I was waiting for the next shoe to drop. But as the weeks turned into months, I realized that the war was truly over, and we had won. The neighborhood had transformed in ways I hadn't even imagined when I first set out on this path. Where there had once been fear and resentment, there was now pride and cooperation. The lawns looked better than ever, not because people were afraid of getting fined, but because they actually cared about their homes again. The park was full of life every weekend. Kids rode their bikes freely, chalk drawings covered the sidewalks, and neighbors stopped to talk to each other instead of hurrying past with their heads down. I decided it was time to think long-term. My revenge had been satisfying, but revenge alone wasn't enough to protect Oakwood Estates forever. So I worked with the new board to create a legacy plan. We wrote a new set of bylaws that limited the power of any future HOA president, including myself. No one person would ever be able to control the HOA the way Karen had, or even the way I had. We set up a financial oversight committee to make sure every dollar was accounted for and that no one could misuse HOA funds again. We created a neighborhood improvement fund, where a portion of dues would go toward projects that benefited everyone, like a new playground or security cameras at the entrances. But the biggest change we made was philosophical. We rewrote the entire mission statement of Oakwood Estates to say that the HOA's purpose wasn't to control people, it was to serve them. We made it clear that our job was to protect property values without destroying people's freedom. We gave homeowners the right to paint their doors any color they wanted, plant whatever flowers they liked, and park their vehicles in their own driveways. It was a balance of order and liberty, and it worked. People stopped seeing the HOA as an enemy and started seeing it as a partner. One night, as I sat on my porch watching the sun set over the row of houses I had once been so close to losing, I couldn't help but smile. I thought back to that first letter, the one that had fined me $500 for trash cans I didn't even put out. I remembered the way my hands had shaken with anger, the sleepless nights I'd spent worrying about losing everything. Back then, I had felt powerless. Now, I felt unstoppable. I hadn't just saved my house. I had saved my entire community. And in a strange way, I realized I had Karen to thank for it. If she hadn't pushed me so hard, I never would have fought back this fiercely. I never would have discovered what I was capable of. She had tried to break me, but instead, she had forged me into something stronger. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least a new version of normal. I started dating again, made time for hobbies I had put on hold, and even planned a short vacation. But no matter what else I did, I never stopped caring about Oakwood Estates. I made it a point to mentor the next generation of board members, teaching them everything I had learned so they wouldn't make the same mistakes as the last board. I reminded them that an HOA should never be about power, it should be about community. And every time a new family moved in, I made sure to welcome them personally, shaking their hands and telling them that this was a neighborhood where they could feel safe, free, and respected. Years later, when I finally decided to step down as HOA president, we held a farewell party at the park. The turnout was huge, bigger than any event we'd ever had. There were kids I'd watched grow up, couples who had moved in during the worst days and stayed to see the neighborhood thrive, and neighbors who had become lifelong friends. As I stood there looking at all of them, I felt an overwhelming sense of pride. I had started this journey angry, desperate, and ready for a fight. I had been just one man against a system designed to crush me. But I had fought back, not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever been pushed around by a petty tyrant with a clipboard. And I had won. When the night ended and I walked back to my house for the last time as HOA president, I glanced once more at the quiet street. The porch lights glowed warmly, crickets chirped in the distance, and everything was calm. My revenge story had turned into a redemption story, for me and for Oakwood Estates. And as I closed my front door, I realized that the best part wasn't that I had bought the HOA. It was that I had given my neighborhood something worth fighting for.